Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm interviewing Dr. Zlotowski. He's a good friend of mine from Redding, California, and he wrote the book Love More, Reflections from an ER Doctor's COVID Journey. A little bit about Steve. He has been an ER doctor for over 25 years and served as chair of his hospital's COVID task force from 2020 to 2022. Dr. Z is also a National Geographic Expeditions physician. Earlier professional experiences include being a chief resident, a flight physician, and a wilderness medicine physician. This is Steve's first book. He is a contest-winning storyteller and hosts storytelling events at 2 venues. Steve, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here, and I'm glad to be talking to you about your new book, Love More. And for the people in our audience and people watching this video, can you just, you probably get asked this so many times, but can you sum up your book and how it kind of came to fruition?
I'm an emergency medicine physician in Northern California. And in February of 2020, I knew the world was going to shift and change, and I knew it was going to do so on a fairly momentous basis, and that, in some way things would never be the same again. Of course, nobody had the crystal ball to know exactly what would happen. And I had never been much of a journaler. I like to write, but I'd never really journaled except for one other time in my life, and it was really related to travel. And I thought, everything I know today is going to be so different from what I know a week from now and a month from now. And I wanted to just capture what it was that I knew when I knew it, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, how the world was changing, and how I was changing with it. And so it really started off as a kind of personal exercise to document my journey through the pandemic, which again, at that point in time, we'd had no idea what it would manifest as in February of 2020. We had no idea how long it would last, what all its permutations would be. And then it was about 3 weeks after I was journaling that a colleague of mine wanted me to make a video to put out about sheltering in place. And this was just after California's governor had been the first state that had basically put out an executive order about sheltering in place unless you're an essential service person. And I said, okay. And I recorded a video. I didn't write anything down. I just spoke into my phone. And he was like, well, you should try to get the local news to carry it. And it became pretty clear that I was a nobody and they were not going to just go, hey, we'll just take this guy's video. And so he's like, well, you should do it on social media. And I went, well, I don't really know anything about that. I guess I had a Facebook account, but I had never really done much of anything with it. And so I put the video out on social media, and somebody responded to me and they said, hey, can I share this? And I said, well, that would be lovely. Thank you. And they said, well, you have to make it to the public, not just to friends. I'm like, well, how do I do that? And so I figured that out. And in 2 days, there were, I think, 2,000 shares and 30,000 views. And I mentioned this to my one son, who's most technologically gifted, Eli, as you would know. And I said, I told him these numbers, and he goes, yeah, well, Dad, to like a millennial, that's not a viral video. I'm like, well, to this guy, it feels like it. So
it would be to me too.
Yeah, right. And then and then it was a few weeks after that I thought, well, maybe I should share a little about what I'm writing, because already in the news at that time was that doctors and nurses were being shut down by hospital administrators in terms of talking about what was happening in a hospital. And I thought that was a great disservice to the public. That if you got to know the enemy, because we were all civilians in war, is the way I really saw it. And the enemy was this virus. And that we should, that if people really wanted to band together and do right by each other, that they needed to hear some sense of what was going on in the hospital, obviously with the privacy concerns and those sensitivities. A few months after I started doing this, I made some offhand comment about how much I was writing. And I said, well, this slowly emerging book. And one of the people commented, well, this is a book. And that was the first time, probably 3 months in, I ever got the thought that at the end of the day, I might do that. And so it was really the book had its core in my first year of writing. And then I extended beyond that in terms of what I thought some of the take home messages were from all those experiences. And yeah, so I didn't do the book in a chronological order. I thought it would be more interesting to have it be thematic. And so the chapters are all themes and the timelines bounce around. And that way it's slightly disorienting, but time was very disorienting in the pandemic. Yeah. So again, it was a book that I never thought I was actually writing, but once the seed got planted, I thought, I think there's something to this.
Those are the best kind. They're authentic. They come from the heart, they come from the soul. Those are the best kind of books. And you can feel it as I was reading it. I could feel your angst at those times. And I feel like even though COVID's in the past and people are thinking, oh, we're done with COVID, what I liked was were the insights and the stories that you told were relevant, probably even more now than even then. And one of the parts that I liked about you was a section where you had the both and. I thought that was really cool because in our divided science, brain science world, we often talk about, the left hemisphere is an either or, it's always protecting us, looking for risk. Can we do this? Can we, is this safe to do? It's a
Right.
closed loop system. And then the right hemisphere is this open loop system. It's curious and it's wondering and it's a creative place. And I felt like your that thinking that concept, how could that in today's schools where we're everybody who's writing to me these days, on all my friends that I'm keeping in touch with in the education system, they're just very stressed because politics have entered education.
I can't say I had any one singular experience in my life where I went, aha,
Yeah,
it's
I'm a both
man,
and guy.
man person. Yeah, check me out. Um, I, but it's just so self-evident, right? To me, I mean, the world is so extraordinarily complicated, and I can't imagine how it could be any other way that because any other way would just be so simplistic. And, I just don't know how you could ever think you're capturing things if it was always A or B and not sometimes the fusion of A and B. There's no separation. There's the safety nets have got all the holes in it, and it finds people like you and me and the people who are in the education world. I think there's a lot of similarity there. So, listening to people and then hearing people, which are different things in my book, really hearing what they're saying. If you do that to come to conclusions, which are just, it's my way or the highway.
And I love that in your book, all through the book, some of the key stories you told were about, gosh, I'm reading the book and thinking about all your experiences and how you've handled them and, the sitting with somebody who you have to tell this is the end, and being there with them. And I thought that like sometimes teachers, and support staff were on the run, and there's somebody who it's not a life or death, but it's something has happened with that child that has really impacted them. When you think about yourself as a child, there are things that even at our age, we remember key things that happened
Mhm.
at school that like how was that allowed to happen or how what and I feel like with you just finding that time in an ER, right? When you've got all these people sitting out there, I was really impressed that you did take that time. And I think in polyvagal world and what I kind of talk a lot about is micro moments. So, Deb Dana and her work in polyvagal theory is that sometimes you connect in those micro moments. They're just little moments. They're not necessarily sit down for a half an hour, but you
Yeah.
look at them in the eyes, and I was just thinking about how in how intense your work is that you I'm just admiring that you had that time or you've taken that time with some of your patients to do that, to listen, actually listen.
Yeah, and I think that uh, maybe something we would talk about more later, but you have to also pick your moments,
Yeah.
because it would be lovely to extend, in half an hour to every single person. But then what I would hear in the next room is, what took you so long? Right? And so our instincts may be that everybody deserves your undivided and untimed attention. But the reality of the workplace is you can't do that for every single person. But so you have to have that sixth sense of when does somebody really need it? And it's not some, and I think we all get better at that.
Yeah, and teachers as well, right? When do they really have to pause and have a child maybe stay in from recess to chat with them about something or ask them to come in after school? I think, but you do some things you talked about in your book that were really important. You would sit down at eye
Yeah.
level with everybody coming in right away. That's a micro connection, right? You would say, "My name's Steve, not
Yeah.
Dr. Zlotowski," right? So you've already said, "Hey, I'm here with you." And one of my favorite quotes, and I actually went to lunch yesterday and was telling a friend of mine about it, was, "If you are or think you are the smartest person in the room, right,
Yep.
you're in the wrong
Don't
room."
know.
I love that. And I'm going to tell you, every time like we had potlucks at your house or something, I knew I was in the right room because I wasn't the smartest person in the room between you and Maggie and everybody else you had over there. It's like I kind of sat in the corner and said, "Please don't ask me too many questions." Right?
Well, I don't know. I'm gonna say you're a powerhouse, but okay.
I just wanted to look at that smartest person in the room and say, how can we look at it as us and others that
Yeah.
we're working with? Are we this,
I love that. I love that. And it's also, there was another entry there that was, I said, and substitute for the word smartest, the most compassionate, the most
yeah,
compelling, the most, generous, the most wise. And then you can learn additional things. But I think so. Uh, what I would say is, as an educator, as a doctor, when we're in the room, are we the smartest person in the room? I would say yes and no, which I guess is a perfect curve back to the both and that
right.
we just talked about. Uh, yes, because we each bring a body of knowledge. We've spent a lot of time learning, honing, and refining, and we have experience that's relevant, and we have a repertoire of maybe analogous situations that we're drawing on, that we feed from to bring into that moment with whoever we're dealing with. And then no, because we are not mind readers, and we may think we know what's going on in somebody's head, but we really don't. And in my world, people will sometimes say things like, well, I know my body, which is a perfectly fair statement to make,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be dismissed. I mean, how do you argue with that? Like, what are you gonna say? No, no, I'm sorry, you don't. You know, that would
Yeah.
they should write you up, right, and complain about you. That would be a crazy thing to say. So, what I have found in that smartest, the yes no camp is, I think the bridge is, I ask people sometimes, well, what do you think is going on?
Yeah.
And for me, and it also has to do with, you talked about, um, safety issues. That's validating somebody. And when I talk to people who are earlier in their career, I talk about validation 101. If you don't walk into a room and within 15 seconds validate somebody, you have not built the foundation that you may desperately need to lean on later in the course of that stay and interaction. And that validation, can be as simple as, I see that you just got out of the hospital 2 days ago. It must be troubling for you to have to come back. Or
Yeah. Yeah.
I can tell you're in a lot of pain. And, you've immediately given that person a sense of I'm being seen, I'm being recognized. And and then the other thing is when you do that, when you say, what do you think is going on? I think you hear things you would never otherwise hear. And now mixed in contemporary society with what you think is going on is they've already done a Google search of their symptoms in my world, and they're telling you what AI has said the problem is, maybe. Uh,
Oh, God.
but this wasn't true till when I started this game.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that it's so subtract that out.
Yeah.
And what you are getting is if you open those doors, you hear things you wouldn't normally hear. And the dilemma with that, as we just were also talking about, is that time is precious. And some stories only come out with time. Because people do not walk in with a stranger in particular, and you say something and they just spill their innermost guts that nobody else has ever heard. That doesn't happen. And even in what may be, a patient-doctor relationship or something they view as hopefully therapeutic, it just doesn't happen. And I have been surprised at how many times I've asked the question, what do you think's going on? And they'll go, well, 15 years ago, and my inner voice is going, oh God, I've, I've got three other people to see. And the outer voice is, you know, listening. And, sometimes have to, you do have to redirect. But I'm surprised and too frequently humbled by when my initial instinct was to redirect and I waited. And then the thing came out that landed on the table that
Big
was
flu.
the
Yeah.
clue. It was helping me answer what was going on for them. And I'm sure because of the constraints, I missed that in my world. I'm sure that happens in your world as well, just again, because of these time issues. But yeah, so I think that we can acknowledge that we bring something in the room. We are smart and we are experienced. And then we have to have the humility to recognize that people are a mystery and a black box in some respect. And that will reveal itself open if you open a place and space for them to do that, that's feels safe and secure.
Yeah, and that's a polyvagal, right? Number one is signals of safety. So by doing that, you're sending signals of safety.
And also to bridge to, when I'm listening to you talk, I mean, so, in emergency medicine, you're often, ostensibly everybody in the room is a stranger, but we actually do have some continuity of care in emergency medicine. And those inside the shop, we know what that means in some respects. And, you have what's called frequent flyers, and there are people that you just get to know. And I like that part of it. It's not everything that we do, but in your setting, you actually do have this continuity of care. And what I was hearing when you were talking about that is, in the last couple of years, I've outside of my work in the emergency department, I've also been doing some work with National Geographic expeditions. So I'm a trip physician, and I'm not, in Antarctica, being the doc for the expedition team. It's their kind of travel business. And so I'm spending 3.5 weeks oftentimes with up to 75 people, and I'm the physician for everybody on that trip and the staff, et cetera. And what I can do in that setting that I can't so readily do in my emergency department is I can build rapport over time. Now that time frame is fairly compressed still relative to a semester or an academic year, but I can have meals with people. I can talk to them about their family, what they've done in their life, what they're experiencing on the trip, what stood out to them most, what's been their favorite part, what they like to do. And, that's all great. And then it may be a weekend that medically they have an ask, there's a need that I am stepping in. And having built that rapport, all of a sudden makes my actual job. It transforms it. Yeah, I was hearing, one of the things that your world might offer a little more than mine is this time to just build the rapport And then when the quote intervention, in my world, it's something medical, happens, you've got all of that to lean on, and the level of trust that somebody has in you, the level of faith that somebody has in you, is just is I can see it in people's faces. It's incredibly gratifying for me, and I think it's extremely comforting for them. And so for everybody, it's a better outcome.
Yeah, and that's, a big part of the polyvagal book I wrote, The Polyvagal Path to Joyful Learning, is it's all about safety and connection. Like that's the big thing with
Hmm.
the nervous system. The nervous system needs to feel safe, but it needs to feel connection. If there's no connection there, you're not going to reach. So I wanted to talk to you about too. There was just so much in your book. We could talk for hours about it. There was so much good stuff. But your World War II veteran friend,
Yeah,
you weave his story through it, and Ernest was his name. Is it Ernest?
yeah, Ernest Wertheim.
Yes. And I thought, um, no matter where he was, if he was in the war, whatever he was doing, he was this horticulturist. Like he planted flowers, he looked for beauty. And the story where he's digging the trench around the school, they're protecting the school because
Yep.
they're being shot at. So they're building trenches so they can shoot before they get to the kid. I'm just like, oh my gosh. But he finds, an irrigation system in his trench. And everybody else is saying, only you would get the irrigation ditch. And he makes another ditch because he's not going to mess up the irrigation system. Right. And I feel
Yeah.
like the message there, I just loved it. And I thought the message there was these are troubling, tough times, right? And we still have to see that beauty. We still have to
Hmm.
find that beauty. And so just, I'd love to hear it from you, like how sitting with him and hearing his stories, how much that impacted how you came to probably your title, probably had something to do with Love More, and also just some of the wisdom insights you bring to the book.
Yeah, thank you. Well, very fortuitous connection. I met Ernest when he was 92 years old, and he was still skiing on the weekends, and he was just a tour de force of life. And in that story, he acquired the name Lieutenant Flowers, because the the soldiers would kid him about how he would, they'd be going through jungle, and it wasn't like it was carefree. And he was noticing plants, and he graduated college, when he was 14 with a landscape architecture degree.
Oh
So for
my.
so for him, it was always the beauty of plants and the beauty of landscapes. Now, as you may recall, I'm, very outdoors oriented, and that's kind of my happy place. But I don't have his sensibility in that way. And we did a number of venues where I would interview him, and I would kind of fold in historical context, and he would tell stories. We're both, drawn by stories, and he was a great storyteller, and he had some incredible stories to share that, as you've kindly mentioned about my book, are they're not rooted in place and time. There are messages and themes that you can grab hold of. So for me, I think he reinforced it. I don't know that, it wasn't invention, but for me, beauty in my work world has always been stories. And it's why I chose my specialty. And I knew that at the time. It's certainly been confirmed a million times over. But I just get to hear, every element of life. I have laughed with people so hard. I have cried with people so hard. I have pondered, the wonder of life with what people have shared. And I feel so fortunate in that. And so that's what sustains me. I was recently, I could share one with you if that might be the time, but I was recently with a friend, and I was having conversation with him. And this was about 4 years ago. I was planning on doing Te Arawa, which is like the equivalent of the Appalachian Trail or the PCT, but it's in New Zealand. So it's the top to the bottom of New Zealand. And it was very important to me because at one time in my life, I was going to move to New Zealand, and I got derailed by a back injury, and I was disabled, and then life moved forward, and it just never happened. So this was my great redemption. And then I had an injury, and as I was preparing, and it was clear I was not going to be able to do this. And I walked into a room, and there was a gentleman in his mid 40s, and he has he was a quadriplegic with a fairly high cervical level, C3 level out of 7, and that has implications. But he was no longer on a ventilator. He could speak and talk, and uh, he was just so calm. And when you do what I do and have worked with people with spinal cord injuries, you see people who have risen above it with a grace that you only hope you could muster. And you've seen people just spiral into addiction and depression. And he was just so calm and relaxed. And I just felt like I could say, so may I ask, how did it happen? Which I don't ask of everybody.
Right.
And he proceeded to tell me this story of when he was 17 years old. So and now he's in his mid 40s, how he was pushed downstairs by an unknown assailant, and he got that injury. And he just relayed this story. And I was wrestling with these demons of mine, this trip that I wasn't doing. And I had been full on into like camping out with s'mores, my pity party of what was happening to me in my life. And I get to see a lot of bad things happen to people. I don't need somebody's one particular story to tell me that my problems in the world maybe don't amount to a hill of beans, so to speak, as Humphrey Bogart might say. But he shared this story, and I was crying, and I just, said that you are a true inspiration. I told him you're a triumph of the human spirit. And he looked at me, and he smiled, and he nodded his head, and it registered in those moments. That was really about his entire physical repertoire. That was what he could do. What I could see here was what he could move. And he just went, God is good. And I think maybe I'm a spiritual person. I'm not a deeply religious person. And I know many people are. And, but no matter how religious you are, no matter how deep your faith is, to be able to get to that point where at 17, your life was transformed by an unknown assailant who pushed you downstairs. I
Mm.
don't know how many people are able to be where he is. And uh, I think about him quite frequently. This is almost 4 years now. And so that's the stuff that I find beautiful. That's the stuff that sustains me. Maggie or my wife could tell you, my kids could tell you, they probably could not tell you a single time I've come home and said, oh, there was this patient and this is what we did medically, this, then this, then this, then this. But they could tell you this. They could tell you the human interest parts.
Mm.
And this is like a battlefield out there now. And I I can sense it. I can't fully appreciate all the elements in education, but I can surmise some of them pretty decently.
A lot of
And
parallels. Reading your
a
book,
lot of parallels.
the woman running down the hall yelling at you in fight, right? Something
Right.
horrible just happened. She's looking for somebody. But your grace of just taking a deep breath. And I once heard somebody say, like, if you're really somebody's coming at you, your first words need to be a breath. And I thought, I like that.
Yeah,
You give your nervous system that little break.
right.
And that happens to us as well, where you're just, in an IEP meeting, then all of a sudden, and you have to know when is this abusive?
Yeah,
When is it a time to just absorb because the pain is just too great for that person to handle it in any other way?
right.
I think that there's just a lot of that going on in education too, and a lot of a sense that you can yell at teachers or and I say to them, you wouldn't let your friends or your spouse friend, so why would you let a stranger? But I think in the case, what happened to you, and for those of you who haven't read the book, it's a really great place to land that story that you tell because it's just so moving because you had just, seen this x-ray of this woman who had metastatic breast cancer and it was all
Yeah.
over her brain, right? And
Right.
you had to
Right.
sit with her and she'd come in with a seizure. I mean, this story was just, you have so many really just fascinating stories, and then
Yeah.
you're, having to tell her, and then was the mother-in-law, I think, that was really upset with you.
It was the mother-in-law who took me behind the woodshed with the axe.
She's just looking for
Like not
somebody.
behind the woodshed, in literally the epicenter of the emergency department. And it went quiet, which we don't see on the TV shows. And she told me I was a horrible person and that, I should not practice medicine. And she was going to see to it that I was going to lose my license because had told her daughter the truth about her diagnosis. I hadn't actually even fully said it.
Yeah,
They could tell how bad it was in terms of what the scan showed by the fact that I was not really even able to vocalize it. I just kind of my lips were kind of quivering, and we all
they're
did each other.
reading the room. Yeah, they're reading you
Yeah,
and
we were
rock.
all teary, and we all knew it. We all knew what it
Yeah,
meant. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so yeah, it's as you say. I mean, it's we encounter this a lot, and I can really appreciate uh, what happens in the education world. But once when you when you start from a place of escalation, trying to go down, boy, that's almost impossible to successfully accomplish.
Yeah,
So you have to start calm and you have to maintain it for as long as you can. And there are times where I can't speak to your world. There are times where you do need to, step up one notch. And but the percentage of healthcare workers in my emergency department and emergency departments around the country who have been physically assaulted is staggering. And I
wow.
bet you it's pretty staggering in education as well. And so it's not just that somebody takes an edgy voice with you. It's that they physically have threatened you and people have been injured. And that's out there. And
Mhm.
yet you have to, there's a lot of talk now. It's like you got to de-escalate because once you participate in the escalation, you are lost and the situation is lost. And it sounds easy, but it's not so
Yeah,
easy.
yeah. And so toward the end of your book, you say, um, love more is kind of destined to fail because you say how do you love people who think differently than you? How do you love people who yell at you in the hallway? How do you yell, and students that are abusive to you, towards you? And I think that, the reality of that, I wanted to ask you is like, well, what the reality is, what with love more? Like you say it's destined to fail unless what? Like, what do you think? Like, is
Well,
it
I'm
within
not
our
going to,
own, own little
it's
circles or?
not a, it's not like I coined the phrase, I don't think. Let me back up for a moment about how the book got that name
Yeah.
as a quick backstory. So as I shared at the opening, I started posting my journal entries, and each journal entry had a title and there were themes, and I would make little blips and references before the actual body of the entry, and every single preamble like that ended with love more. And that happened because I started to take as I was absorbing the world, I mean, it's pathetic, really, that someone who does what I do for a living should need a reminder that life is fragile. I mean, as much as anybody, I
Right.
should know that. And yet, at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was following very closely what was happening in Italy, and priests and nurses and doctors were dying by the score at the bedside in northern Italy. And I figured I'm going to get this. I just assumed I was going to get it. I thought, you know, not so old and I'm generally healthy. I think I'll get through it, but you don't know. But my reaction was, I need to love more in every direction. I need to extend that to every patient I see, my family, my friends, any and everybody that I interact with. That's going to be my antidote to this fragility. And so that's how the book ultimately got its title. What does it mean in this world where everybody seems to want to hate seemingly just about everybody else? So much of my persona, my family history is my family's history and the intergenerational trauma. Both my parents are Holocaust survivors, and that has informed my life probably more than anything else has. And I'm still learning at this stage of my life what that intergenerational trauma has manifested for me. So when people come out with such hatred towards Jews, and I'm supposed to go, I love you more. That's a challenge, and everybody's got whatever permutations of their challenge are. And so one of the transformative moments for me, and I shared this in the book, and at the end, in the epilogue, was from our backyard, was when I first became acquainted for Run for Salmon, which was something that the Winnemem tribe was doing in our neck of Northern California. And the idea was to take the heirs of the McCloud River salmon, which they believed actually were now in New Zealand because some had transported to New Zealand, uh, and bring them back and allow them to come back up the Sacramento River and to get back into Shasta Lake and to go back up through the McCloud River. Of course, there's no waterway that allows these fish to do that. And even if you build adjacent waterways and conduits, which is the goal, there's the water's getting warmer. There's, heavy metals, there's silt, there's all these obstacles to achieving that goal. And when one of the tribal council members said, when somebody asked that question, yeah, but how, even if you do this, how is it possible with all these obstacles that you could realize uh, that the salmon would get back and spawn in the McCloud River? And the tribal connection with the salmon is it's everything to them. It's spiritual, it's food, it's everything. It's The response was, well, if we can do it, then all the obstacles will fall into place and resolve themselves. And it was a transformative moment for me that the answer to the problem was the solution of the problem. But like you can't say, well, the means to the end. You have to say, if we achieve the end, then the means they resolve themselves. It turned the equation around in a fairly profound way for me. And that's when I started to go, okay, so what is the end that we can all agree on? That we may disagree about A and B and C, but is there an end that we can all agree on that could unify our xenophobic species and allow us to then, in the process of making something right in that realm, then the A and the B and the C, they fade and they weaken. And that's the hope and the aspiration. I, I've come to believe that's the only way. I don't think I'm going to sit down with people on certain fronts and have a great dialogue, and they're probably not going to convince me, and I'm not going to convince them. So there's got to be some other realm out there. And I think there are those things out there. I surely believe there are, but whether we'll take that collective path together, yeah, that might be a little bit tough. So
Realm is the title of your book, right? It's it's
yeah,
loving more, and that's I think something we can all agree on. I feel like I talk about you in your book you say something about the one thing, and in my workshops I'm known for the one thing person. Like I always say, I know it's so much we have to do in education, right? And I've just given you 100 different activities and things. What's one thing Monday? If it's a Friday workshop, what's one thing on Monday? Just one. Start
yeah,
there. And your message to me was so profound because as I go out in the world now and I encounter my friends who are on different sides of all of this. I to say, is this being kind or is this, loving more?
Where I was in my career, uh, what was happening in the world and what was going on inside me. And what I found that I was focused on in my workplace, that I think I'd always done, hopefully, and I hope I'd done a good job with it, but that was now front and center, was the kindness of a stranger, was to be a kind stranger. And I have, again, that opportunity every day. I'm blessed, and I can't imagine maybe another job where in more intimate settings with more strangers in a day and the people who are with them, their family and friends, uh, that I get a chance to be a kind stranger. It really hit me, and it's so important to me because half the rooms I walk into, again, globally speaking, I could be in a very different position from somebody on so many other things that are important to me, and I could be in a very different position on things that are very important to them. And, I can say I'm more right, and they can say they're more right. Nobody wins this way. You cannot have half of people going another half of the people in my book and ever think that anybody truly wins. And so I wrote this all down, and I've been reading a lot of Aldous Huxley this last year. I reread Brave New World. I've been reading some of his other stuff. And he had this quotation that said, that's a little bit embarrassing after 45 years of research and study, that about the only advice I can give to people is to be kinder to each other. I have no right to be in his company, but yet in this moment, I found that I was, that uh, that he was speaking a great truism, and that I had just, in dumb luck, sort of stumbled on it. So that to me, that's everything right now to me. If somebody were to go home as a patient and you gave me a choice, and they could say, hey, I had this doctor today, and I've been seeing doctors for 2 years, and I never got an answer. And he was the one, and he gave me an answer, and he gave me a treatment. Or they could say, I saw this doctor today, and I can't believe how kind he was to me. I would choose that over my medical acumen. It's the only way out that I can see right now,
Yeah.
because the alternative is just hatred and what comes of hatred. And so love more, that wasn't in the book, per se, but that's really what it's manifested. It's like, what can I do? And if I'm doing that, I'm walking my walk. And we talked about authenticity right at the very beginning,
Mhm.
very important word, and I embrace it wholly. And if I'm doing that, then, nobody can call me to task that I'm not trying to be what I'm talking about. There's also this thing I've been reading all my life in the Passover Seder, which is from Pirkei Avot, which I think is like from the 2nd century. And again, I am not a scholar, and I'm not a religious person, but I try to learn from things. And the passage, it's been variously translated many different ways, but a translation that I like essentially is, you're not expected to complete the work, but neither may you refrain from doing your unique part. And I suppose that's just a reiteration of being part of the process and hoping that you're passing the torch, and that you're on the right side of the ledger, because no one of us can solve everything.
In this time of what's going on, I felt like I needed to interview you to bring this message forward. And you've done it in your book in such a way that's relatable. Your book really spoke to me and it moved me, and it's every day I think about that. Is this kind? Is this loving?
I had to write through one of several lenses. One was as a COVID doctor on the front lines. The other one was as a child of survivors and what that has taught me. And then the third was, an entire lifetime of being a story collector. from the richest source of stories to me imaginable, and how those were metaphors for things that were going on in our world. And those are, I think, fairly timeless because the messages are, timeless. I mean, the things that troubled people 500 years ago, a lot of times are still the same things today. So, yeah. And then, as I said, it kind of settled back on, on kindness. So, yeah, thanks. I can say that, you that, as you said, this is not maybe the normal course of an interview that you would do. I'm honored and thrilled and greatly appreciative that we're doing this. I don't think, I don't think I've learned more from an interview because we're really doing this. I've got this world and you're in that world, but where's the crossover? Where's the commonality? And I don't know that I've been challenged more, which is wonderful. I don't think I've had more fun, which is fantastic. And uh, and also gives me a lot of hope what you've shared, what you're doing, uh, and catching up. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And to anybody who's listening and in the education world, I would say in our family as a couple, if you took a look at the cohort of people who are friends and what they do for a living, more people are probably in education than any other signal bucket. And I just want to say thank you for what you do, because you've been on the front line long before COVID came around and we started to turn that term. Uh, I I can appreciate and know all of the cracks and fabrics in our society that land in your laps, and what you have to do. And I don't even have to deal with cell phone nightmares and social media and AI. And so there's a whole nother category of things of late that people in the education world are dealing with that I'm relatively spared from. I can't imagine how people do it. Thank you. I can't think that anybody's doing anything more important. So thanks.
Thank you for spending the time.